If there was a moment in my life that deserved an Oscar for Best Unplanned Disaster, it was the Hamiltons' dinner party. You see, I never wanted to go. I had spent my entire Saturday fixing the lawnmower that somehow broke itself, according to my wife, Angelina, who swears mechanical objects malfunction just to spite her. The last thing I wanted was to squeeze into a too-tight blazer and pretend I enjoyed overpriced cheese and conversations about stocks and real estate. But Angelina was insistent. It'll be fun, Adam. You never want to go anywhere. So, like a dutiful husband, I went. The Hamiltons' house was the kind of place that made you wonder what they were compensating for. Enormous glass windows, furniture you weren't allowed to sit on, and artwork that looked like something a toddler scribbled during a sugar rush. Their idea of hospitality was offering you a wine that cost more than my first car, but came in portions small enough to offend a squirrel. Angelina fit right in. She floated through the room like a seasoned politician, laughing at all the right moments, nodding at all the boring conversations. Meanwhile, I was stuck in a corner with some guy explaining the importance of liquid assets in excruciating detail. I had just begun plotting my escape when something caught my eye. Well, actually, someone. A man. Not just any man, though. The way he looked at my wife from across the room made me pause. Not because he was being obvious, but because she wasn't looking back at him like a woman who had just met someone at a party. She looked at him like someone who had already met him 100 times. Now, I'm not the jealous type. I don't see every guy as a threat, and I certainly don't believe that men and women can't be friends. But there was something about this particular man and my particular wife that sent my internal alarm system blaring. It wasn't in what they did. It was in what they didn't do. No introductions. No small talk. No, oh, honey, this is so-and-so. Nope. Instead, there was a pause, a recognition, and then an awkward, almost calculated effort to pretend that neither had noticed the other. It was the kind of performance that screamed we must act normal, or we will absolutely be caught. And that's when I knew. I didn't know what I knew yet, but I knew something. And suddenly, I was very interested in sticking around this dreadful party. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and immediately sense that something is off? Like when you enter your own house and notice a chair slightly out of place, even though no one else would see it. That was me at the Hamiltons' dinner party, except instead of furniture, it was my wife's entire demeanor that was slightly wrong. Angelina was good at a lot of things. Decorating our house with expensive nonsense, explaining why buying another pair of shoes was necessary, and convincing me that my weekend plans should align perfectly with hers. But one thing she wasn't good at? Acting normal when something wasn't. I watched her from across the room, pretending to listen to a conversation about the importance of networking in today's economy, which I could only assume was code for how to brag about your job without sounding like you're bragging about your job. But I wasn't actually paying attention. My focus was on Angelina and him. Let's talk about him. Tall, maybe my age, maybe a few years younger. Polished in a way that suggested he took longer to get ready than his wife. Yes, wife, because I noticed a woman hanging onto his arm, clearly playing the part of the spouse who either didn't know or didn't care. But here's the interesting part. I had never seen this guy before, yet something about the way Angelina carried herself around him made it obvious that they had history. Recent history. I tested my theory. I walked over. Not too fast, not too slow. Casual. Like a guy who wasn't at all suspicious of the way his wife's body tensed ever so slightly when she noticed me approaching. Hey, I said, my voice completely neutral. I don't think we've met. The guy's face barely changed. Cool, collected, controlled. Too controlled. Ethan, he said, shaking my hand. His grip was firm, practiced. I bet he played golf and considered it a real sport. Angelina, who could usually talk her way out of anything, was suddenly incredibly focused on adjusting her bracelet. Adam, I replied, still holding his handshake for a beat too long. And you are? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced at Angelina, just for a second, a quick flick of the eyes, like he was checking if she would jump in and answer for him. She didn't. I work with Angelina, he finally said, his smile perfectly balanced between friendly and please don't ask any follow-up questions. Now, I'm not an idiot. I know my wife's co-workers. I know their names, their jobs, the one she likes, the one she pretends to like, And the one she complains about after 2 glasses of wine. This guy had never been mentioned. Not once. Really? I said, acting interested. What department? Again, that tiny pause. Like he needed a second to make sure he had his story straight. Marketing, he said. Huh. That was funny because my wife worked in brand strategy, and she had once given me an entire TED Talk about how those are not the same thing, Adam. Stop assuming they are the same thing. Oh, nice, I said, nodding like I was impressed. Angelina's never mentioned you. I watched carefully. People give away more than they realize when they're caught off guard. Angelina, for example, suddenly found the need to sip her drink like it contained the answer to life's biggest questions. Ethan, on the other hand, kept his cool. Yeah, we don't work directly together, he said smoothly. Different teams. But we cross paths in meetings sometimes. Meetings? Sure. I could have left it at that. I could have pretended that I didn't just witness an entire unspoken conversation between my wife and this man. But something about his confidence bugged me. It wasn't just the confidence of a guy who knew how to lie. It was the confidence of a guy who wasn't afraid of being caught. And that made me curious. Ah, gotcha, I said, keeping my voice light. I should probably introduce myself to your wife, then. If you two work together, I'm sure she and Angelina know each other well. Now, that got a reaction. It was fast. So fast most people wouldn't have noticed. But I did. The way Ethan's smile tightened just a fraction. The way Angelina's fingers tensed around her glass. She's over there, Ethan said, nodding toward a woman chatting with the Hamiltons. Go ahead. I was already moving before he finished speaking. Angelina's eyes followed me as I walked away, and I could practically hear her thoughts. I reached Ethan's wife, Rebecca, as it turned out, and introduced myself. She was polite, smiling, the kind of person who knew how to navigate these high society nonsense parties. But when I casually mentioned that our spouses worked together, something flickered across her face. They do, she said, tilting her head slightly. I didn't know that. Huh. Interesting. Now, at this point, I could have played dumb. I could have let it go, made small talk, walked away. But no. I was having too much fun. Yeah, I said, nodding. Apparently, they've been in a lot of meetings together. Rebecca blinked. Meetings? And there it was. That tiny, almost imperceptible pause before someone realizes they're hearing a lie for the first time. Angelina, my dear wife, was still watching from across the room, her expression carefully blank. Ethan, meanwhile, was chatting with another group of people, looking completely at ease. Rebecca's smile didn't falter, but I could tell something in her brain was working overtime. Funny, she said, swirling her drink in her glass. Because Ethan doesn't work in marketing. I stared at her. Now that was an interesting plot twist. He doesn't? I asked, playing dumb. No, she said, shaking her head, her voice light but pointed. He works in sales. Has for years. I didn't say anything for a moment, mostly because I was enjoying how this was unfolding. Rebecca and I had just been handed the same puzzle, and neither of us had to say it out loud to know that the pieces weren't fitting. Across the room, Angelina was still watching me, her fingers tapping lightly against her glass. Ethan, on the other hand, had finally looked over, just for a second. Just enough to register that I was standing there, talking to his wife, putting pieces together. And that's when I knew. Not just that something was wrong, not just that my wife had been lying, but that whatever this was, it had just gotten interesting. I didn't expect to be forming a temporary investigative partnership with Rebecca Hamilton, but life has a way of throwing curveballs. Some people win the lottery, others trip on a sidewalk in front of a large crowd, and apparently, I was the guy who found himself standing next to a woman realizing, in real time, that her husband had been feeding her nonsense. Rebecca was composed, too composed. The kind of composed that made me wonder if this was really new information for her, or if she'd just been waiting for confirmation. Her nails tapped against her glass as she processed the fact that her husband, Ethan, had just lied to my face. So, she said finally, her voice as light as ever, Angelina and Ethan are in a lot of meetings together? I nodded. She took a small sip of her wine, considering. That's funny. It is, I agreed. A pause. Then, she turned to face me fully. How much do you want to bet that if we checked their calendars, we'd find exactly 0 overlapping meetings? I had to respect her approach. Straight to the point, no dramatic gasping, no sudden outburst of anger. Just the logical next step. That depends, I said. Do you have access to his calendar? Rebecca's lips twitched into a smile. Of course I do. She didn't hesitate. With the kind of smoothness that only came from years of living with someone who thought he was smarter than he was, she pulled out her phone, opened her email, and tapped a few times. I watched her scan the screen, her expression giving nothing away. Then, after a few seconds, she turned the phone toward me. Look at that, she said cheerfully. Ethan hasn't had a single meeting with Angelina. Ever. Huh. Now, I'm not saying I expected him to have scheduled an event titled Secret Meeting with Adam's wife. Do not tell anyone. But it would have been nice to see something, anything, that could have at least made his lies slightly more believable. Well, I said, pretending to be impressed, he must have a gift for telepathic meetings. Rebecca chuckled. Or he thinks I'm stupid. I liked her. She didn't panic, didn't launch into a full-on meltdown. She just gathered information, processed it, and immediately started thinking about the next step. So, she said, locking her phone and slipping it back into her purse, what do we do next? That was a great question. Most men in my situation would either storm across the room and demand answers, or pretend nothing was happening because maybe it's all just a misunderstanding, and maybe my wife isn't lying to me, and maybe I'm the crazy one. But I wasn't most men. Do you know his password? I asked. Rebecca scoffed. Which one? Now that was interesting. The one that would tell us what we need to know, I said. She thought for a second, then smirked. I might. Now, let's get something straight. I had never, in my entire life, been interested in going through my wife's phone, emails, or private messages. Not because I was against it on some moral level, but because I had never needed to. But the second I realized that Angelina and Ethan were lying to both of us, that changed. Rebecca, apparently, had no such moral dilemmas. She pulled her phone out again, tapped a few times, and then, just like that, she was in Ethan's email. I blinked. Wow, I said. No hesitation. She shrugged. He's used the same password for everything since college. Ethan, you idiot. She scrolled, eyes flicking across the screen. Let's see, work emails, spam, oh. I leaned in. Oh. She turned the phone slightly so I could see. It was an email. From Ethan. To my wife. The subject line? Cancel Friday. Adam's suspicious. Well, that was direct. Rebecca let out a slow breath, reading through the rest of it. Wow, this is bold. I didn't respond. I was still processing the fact that my wife and Ethan had apparently decided that I was an obstacle to be scheduled around. Rebecca handed me the phone. You want to read it? Or should I just give you the highlights? I took it. The email itself wasn't long, but it didn't need to be. The content was damning enough. Angelina, don't book the hotel this week. Adam's paying more attention than usual. Play it safe. A few things happened in my brain at once. First, a hotel? Second, they're not even pretending to be subtle about it. Third, oh, so I'm the problem here? I exhaled through my nose, handed the phone back to Rebecca, and adjusted my tie like I had just sat through a particularly disappointing business meeting. So, I said, hotel. Rebecca nodded, her expression unreadable. Hotel. We stood there for a moment, the party buzzing around us like nothing was happening. Then, she put her phone away, smoothed out her dress, and said, let's find out which one. Now that was a woman after my own heart. Rebecca had a fire in her eyes that I respected. She wasn't the type to cry in a bathroom or throw a wine glass across the room. No, she was the kind to sit there, process the situation like a spreadsheet, and immediately start working on a solution. If I weren't currently dealing with the fact that my wife and her husband had a hotel-based extracurricular activity, I might have been impressed. So, she said, sliding her phone into her purse like it was just another Tuesday. We need that hotel. I glanced across the room. Angelina was laughing at something someone had said, her hand lightly touching Ethan's arm in a way that could pass as casual if you weren't currently holding email proof that they were sneaking around. Do you have access to his credit card statements? I asked. Rebecca smirked. That depends. Do you have access to Angelina's? We both stared at each other for a beat, the unspoken answer obvious. 15 minutes later, we had relocated to an empty side room of the Hamiltons' house, a place filled with furniture no one had ever actually sat on. Rebecca was scrolling through her husband's banking app, and I was logging into our shared credit card account with the kind of calm detachment one usually reserved for paying bills. Bingo. Royal Crest Hotel, I said, reading the most recent transaction, last Friday, and the Friday before that. And I kept scrolling. Well, at least they're consistent. Rebecca held up her phone. Same here. Ethan's got charges from Royal Crest, too. There it was. The proof. Not that I had needed more than the email, but still, nothing quite hits like irrefutable financial evidence. Rebecca crossed her arms. What do you want to do with this information? Now, this was a fascinating question. A lesser man might have gone straight for the dramatic confrontation. A predictable man might have called Angelina out right here at the party, throwing her affair onto the social stage like some poorly written soap opera. But I wasn't interested in dramatic screaming matches. That was for people who wanted closure. I wanted consequences. I leaned back against the overpriced couch and exhaled. We're not just going to expose them, I said. We're going to make them regret every decision that led them here. Rebecca's smile was slow and sharp. I like the way you think. We spent the next hour crafting a plan. Not some cheap, petty revenge stunt, but a calculated, efficient dismantling of their carefully built lies. The goal wasn't just to catch them. It was to make sure their own actions unraveled their lives for them. Step 1. Make sure they panic before they even know why. Rebecca texted Ethan from his own phone. Just a casual message, something like, "Hey, I think Adam knows. We need to talk." Then, she set his phone back on the table like nothing had happened. Step 2. Create a financial inconvenience. I called Royal Crest Hotel, pretending to be Ethan. Told them I had lost an item in one of the rooms last week and needed details on the billing. After some standard verification, which I easily bypassed, thanks to the information Rebecca had pulled, I had them email me a full transaction history. And what do you know? They had paid for room service, champagne, massage appointments, one rental robe that had somehow gone missing. They were living the luxury affair life. Rebecca shook her head. Disgusting. Unoriginal, I corrected. At least cheat with some creativity. Step 3. Let the consequences start rolling in. Rebecca sent the transaction history to Ethan's boss. Not as an accusation, just as a friendly inquiry about whether certain expenses aligned with company policy. Nothing like a little financial fraud investigation to spice up a marriage. Meanwhile, I printed out every hotel receipt, every email, and every charge, neatly stacked them into a folder, and placed it right on Angelina's nightstand at home. No note, no explanation. Let her marinate in that mystery. Step 4. Make them fall into their own trap. The next day, Rebecca and I went about our lives like nothing had happened. I went to work. She went to brunch. We waited. And sure enough, by noon, my phone buzzed. Angelina. I didn't answer. Another text. We need to talk. I let that one sit for an hour. Then, I replied. Busy. Maybe later. Silence. By the evening, when I got home, she was pacing in the living room. Her usual confidence swapped for something much more enjoyable, uncertainty. Adam, she started, her voice careful. We should? Oh, I know, I interrupted, setting my keys down. We really should. And then I walked past her into the kitchen, poured myself a drink, and let the tension do all the work. Rebecca, meanwhile, reported that Ethan had been frantically trying to figure out what was going on all day. Calls, texts, even a sudden, unexplained attempt to move money out of a shared account. The panic had set in. The real fun was just beginning. Angelina was trying very hard to pretend she wasn't panicking. I had seen her in stressful situations before. Losing her phone? Immediate chaos. Losing her favorite earrings? A full investigation. But right now, she was fighting against every natural instinct to keep herself from blurting out something that would give her away. I watched her, sipping my drink, waiting. Adam, she tried again. Slower this time. like she was dealing with an easily startled animal. Is something wrong? The effort it took not to laugh was immense. She wasn't asking because she cared. She was asking because she needed to know how much I knew. She was looking for landmines before she stepped on one. I set my glass down and gave her a very neutral, very patient expression. Why would something be wrong? That threw her off. A flash of hesitation. Just a second. Then, the classic move, the fake concerned wife. She tilted her head just slightly, like she was about to deliver some heartwarming Hallmark speech about how she only wanted the best for us. I just feel like you've been distant, she said, and I swear to God, it took everything in me not to applaud. Distant, I echoed, nodding. Huh, that's interesting. I let the silence stretch, just enough to see her shift on her feet. She was waiting for me to say something, waiting for a cue, a direction, a clue about where this conversation was headed. I wasn't going to give her one. Instead, I stood up, stretched a little, and casually asked, "By the way, how was work today?" She blinked. "What?" "Work," I repeated. "Meetings? Anything interesting?" And there it was. The tiniest flinch. The hesitation. Angelina was a quick liar. Not perfect, just quick. She had a second's delay before she responded, barely noticeable to most people. "Nothing special," she said, and I had to admire the sheer commitment to staying vague. "Same stuff, different day." I smiled. "Oh, good. I was worried things were too exciting over there." She was trying to read me, and I could tell it was making her nervous that I wasn't giving her anything. No accusations, no anger. Just an absurdly calm, mild-mannered husband who was very interested in her work schedule all of a sudden. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it, quick, reflexive, before turning it face down. I already knew who it was. Ethan had probably spent the entire day pacing his office, wondering if the universe was about to drop an anvil on his life. Meanwhile, Rebecca had kept me updated with every single one of his desperate attempts to cover his tracks. First, there had been the bank transfer, an attempt to move money, likely to some hidden fund for when everything inevitably blew up. Rebecca had reversed the transfer immediately. Then, there were the messages. "Rebecca, he's texting me nonsense, trying to explain things before I even accused him of anything." Me? What's he saying? Rebecca, that he was at the hotel alone. For business reasons. Me? Did you ask why he needed champagne and a robe for business? Rebecca. Oh, don't worry. I asked. He said he was stressed and wanted to relax. Me, wow. That's just beautiful. Rebecca. Should I tell him I'm planning a business trip to the spa to relax with a male coworker? Me? Please do. And now, here was Angelina, sitting in my kitchen, doing everything she could to keep her breathing steady while her affair partner texted her God knows what. I let her squirm for another minute before I decided it was time for the next step. "Oh," I said suddenly, as if I had just remembered something minor. "By the way, we should talk about money." Angelina tensed. That was the funny thing about people like her. The moment money came into the conversation, all emotions immediately became secondary. "What about it?" she asked, way too carefully. "Well," I said, keeping my tone light, "I was just looking through our accounts today, and I noticed something interesting." Her posture went rigid. "Something interesting?" "Yeah," I said, nodding. "Royal Crest Hotel. Last Friday. And the Friday before. And, well," I waved a hand. "I won't bore you with the whole list." I watched as her brain did the math. She had two options. 1. Deny. Pretend it wasn't her charge, act confused, claim it was some mistake. 2. Deflect. Get angry, accuse me of being paranoid, make me seem like the unreasonable one. The problem was, neither of those options worked if I already knew. She went for a classic move, stalling. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but there was no real conviction behind it. "Sure you don't," I said, nodding. "I mean, it makes sense. Why would you remember something like that?" I stood up, grabbed the folder I had so generously left on her nightstand, and dropped it onto the kitchen counter. She stared at it, didn't touch it, didn't open it, just stared. Then, as if her body was moving before her brain could catch up, she reached for her phone. I smirked. "Go ahead. Text Ethan." See what he thinks. Her hand froze. It was beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. For the first time in this entire ridiculous, pathetic, insulting affair, she had nothing to say. I picked up my drink again and took a sip, letting the weight of the moment settle between us. And then, just to make sure she knew exactly where this was going, I smiled and said, "By the way, I wouldn't bother checking our joint account. I moved everything this afternoon." The color drained from her face. Now that was fun to watch. Angelina's mouth opened like she had a brilliant defense lined up, but all that came out was silence. Her eyes darted toward her phone again, like it held some emergency exit plan. I had to admire the consistency. Even in the face of absolute disaster, she still thought she could text her way out of it. "I wouldn't bother," I said, nodding at the phone. "Ethan's probably a little busy right now." Her expression flickered. "What do you mean?" "Well," I said, pretending to think about it. "Let's just say Rebecca's having a productive day." And that hit. The sheer horror of hearing that Ethan's wife, her co-conspirator's supposedly oblivious spouse, was involved changed her entire face. Rebecca, as it turned out, was even better at revenge than I had expected. I had received a text from her just before I walked in the house. "Rebecca, just finished the meeting with Ethan's boss. Guess who doesn't have a job anymore? Me. Beautiful. How'd it go?" "Rebecca, fantastic." The fraud investigation was the cherry on top. Turns out, the company wasn't thrilled about an employee expensing hotel stays for business while enjoying very personal services. Me, ouch. "Rebecca, oh, don't feel too bad. He technically still has a job for another 2 weeks. That's when his final paycheck comes through. Then, no more salary, no more benefits, and definitely no more company credit card." Me? And his reaction? "Rebecca, oh," he panicked, sweating through his expensive suit, stammering, begging. It was embarrassing. Me? Sounds incredible. "Rebecca, you have no idea." I took another sip of my drink, watching Angelina try to process her own impending disaster. "So," I said, breaking the silence, "I'd love to hear the explanation for this one. You know, just for entertainment purposes." She swallowed, finally grasping at the denial and deflection playbook. "Adam," she started, smoothing out her tone into something soft, reasonable. "I think you're misunderstanding." "Nope," I cut in, cheerful. "I'm really not." Her lips pressed together. She knew I wasn't biting. That's when she tried the guilt flip. "Look," she said, her voice dipping into "I'm the victim here" territory. "I know things haven't been perfect between us." I grinned. "Oh, do you?" "I mean, we've been distant," she continued, pushing forward like I hadn't just mocked her. "You've been so busy with work, and I raised my hand. "Hold that thought. You know what's wild?" She blinked. I grabbed my phone off the counter and tapped through my messages. Rebecca actually called this exact excuse word for word before I even walked in here. She frowned. "What?" "Yeah," I said, scrolling. "Let's see. Oh, here it is." I cleared my throat dramatically. "Adam, she's going to say she felt neglected, that you were too busy, that she was lonely. It's all complete nonsense, of course, but she's hoping you'll be dumb enough to feel guilty." I set the phone down and smiled at her. "That's what you were going for, right?" Her mouth opened, closed. Then came the fake outrage. "This is crazy," she snapped, arms crossing. "You've been spying on me? You went through my private things?" I laughed. "Angelina, I didn't need to go through your things. You're terrible at this." And that was what finally did it. Not the accusation, not the evidence, but the sheer dismissiveness of it. Her entire posture changed. She realized she had lost. "So what now?" she asked, her voice tight. "Oh," I said, waving a hand. "I'm divorcing you." There was no dramatic pause, no build-up, just a simple, matter-of-fact statement. Angelina stiffened. "You're not even going to try to talk about this?" I laughed again. "Talk? Why? So you can come up with another excuse? Maybe a few crocodile tears?" I shook my head. "Come on, you know me better than that." She inhaled sharply through her nose. "Adam, I already moved all the money," I interrupted, "which, by the way, means no more shopping sprees on my dime." Rebecca and I also went ahead and hired the same divorce lawyer. He's fantastic, by the way. You'll be hearing from him soon. Her hands curled into fists at her sides. You and Rebecca? I tilted my head, pretending to think about it. Yeah, I feel like this whole thing really brought us together. Her jaw clenched. Are you sleeping with her? I grinned. Oh, now you're interested in marital loyalty? That shut her up. The best part? I wasn't even lying. Rebecca and I hadn't done anything yet. But the moment I had watched her destroy Ethan's career in under an hour, I had started thinking, now, this is the kind of woman I should have married. Angelina was still processing, so I decided to speed things along. You should probably call Ethan, I said, picking up my glass again. See how he's holding up. She hesitated, because she knew what I meant. She picked up her phone, unlocked it, and, yep, there it was. The last message from Ethan. Ethan, Rebecca knows. It's bad. Call me. And, right below that, Rebecca, hey, just a heads up. The divorce papers are on the way. Also, your boss says good luck with unemployment. Angelina turned pale. I patted her shoulders sympathetically. Tough break. Then, I walked upstairs, packed a bag, and left. 2 weeks later, Rebecca and I met at a bar. Not the fancy kind, just the type where no one asks questions and the beer is cheap. She raised a glass toward me. To officially ending bad decisions. I clinked mine against hers. And making better ones. She smirked. Are you saying I'm a better decision? I grinned. Rebecca, you just dismantled a man's life with zero hesitation. I'd be an idiot not to be interested. She laughed. I think this is the first time in a long time that I actually like the person sitting across from me. I leaned back, watching her with amusement. Get used to it. And just like that, we moved on, without looking back. Thanks for watching. Rate the story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel.